Hello there, it's Juliana Michaels and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm sharing some easy distress ink techniques that you can use with stamps and embossing folders to create your own custom backgrounds and embellishments. I encourage you to find similar stamps and embossing folders to use from your stash. However, if you're interested in any of the products I'm using in this video, you can find the supply list with links in the description box below. When you shop through those links, and whether you purchase that exact item or something else entirely, you're supporting me at no extra cost to you, and I really appreciate that so very much. Now let's get into the making.
So for this card, the stamps and stencils I'm going to be working with are from Timholtz and Stampers Anonymous, and the stencils, one of the stencil sets I'll be working with is the mini layering stencils 25. In particular, this kind of flourishy design. I'll be using Papillon CMS 106, and then these mixed media stamps and stencil sets that are mixed media 15 and 44. The mediums I'm going to be using are some Distress ink and Distress Oxide ink. So the Distress inks are Speckled Egg and Bundled Sage, and I'm going to be using those for the background. And then I'll also be using the Distress Spritz and Peeled Paint, so that's for the background. And then I'm also going to be using the Vintage Photo Distress Oxide to do the stamping for my sentiment. And instead of using like an archival ink, which is what I usually use when stamping with the rubber stamps, because these stamps are photopolymer, they stain a little easier, and I just, personal preference, don't care for that staining from the archival ink, so I'm going to stamp the sentiment here using the Oxide ink. And then these die and embossing folder that I'm going to be using are the Layered Butterfly, and this is number 659578. It is extremely hard to find. It's been retired for a long time. I was at my friend's house crafting, and she happened to have this set, and I asked her if I could borrow it. I have wanted to be able to use it for a very long time. It's a Biggs die, so this is a steel rule die. It'll cut through chipboard and pretty much anything you can imagine. And then it also has this coordinating embossing folder that you can use to add some dimension and detail to the die cut. If you don't have this particular die and embossing folder or any of the supplies that I'm using, please feel free to look through your stash for something similar. I just want to share the techniques that I'm doing. You can use them with any of your supplies. So make sure you go through your stash first. But if you are interested in any of the supplies I'm using, you can always find links to them in the description box below if they're still available. And when you shop through those links, you are supporting me, so I appreciate that so very much. So now I'm going to work on creating a repeat pattern for the background, and this is kind of a practice background that I made, and I would highly recommend doing this yourself as well. Just take some scrap paper, even just some copy paper, printer paper, and do the stamping. You don't need to do all the rest of the inking, but to lay out the pattern that we're going to create. And then you can kind of use that as a template for where to place your stamps to create your pattern. And I always, when I'm laying out the pattern, I try to kind of think about spacing and getting them so that they're equally spaced apart from each other to create the pattern. And as you can see here, this paper is a little bit larger than a standard size card. This is a finished card. It's going to be like 5 by 6, and the paper here that I've got, the background, is cut to 4 3/4 by 5 3/4. And then as you can see here, as I'm laying these out, I'm just kind of trying to keep that spacing between them somewhat even, and then using this background that I'd already created kind of as a template to repeat that same pattern. Make sure everybody's fitting on my stamp platform here. And sometimes even after I do this, I do kind of still go back and make some adjustments. So I think I'm going to slide that one down just a little bit there. And then I can lift up my stamps. And then I can remove that practice paper. And now I'm going to just apply the Bundled Sage Distress ink to my stamps here. And then you'll find with the Distress inks, you're going to get kind of that little bit of a blotching, especially more so, I feel like, with these photopolymer stamps. So you might need to just stamp it a couple times to kind of help fill that in. And the ink, as it dries, will kind of slightly fill that in a little bit as well. But sometimes I find just kind of holding the stamp down on the paper kind of helps it soak in a little bit better as well. And then from there, you're just going to take your paper, and if you want to go ahead, you can dry that if you like. If you want to make sure you're not going to accidentally smudge anything, I would recommend, you know, cleaning off your stamps in between so that you're, when you go to like try to line up and make sure you're getting everything where you want it, that it doesn't smudge your paper. And then I'm just going to dry this real quick with my heat tool, again, just to make sure I don't smudge anything when I'm trying to line things up again. All right, so now I'm just going to see about getting this lined up from where we did earlier. So you can see when I lay that down, kind of that pattern we're getting with the images. Slide that over just a teeny bit more. There we go. And kind of double check everything. And now I'm just going to ink those up and stamp that. Okay. And now we have our repeat stamped background. And now the next thing we're going to do is make sure this is dry. So I'm just going to use your heat tool to dry that real quick if need be. And now we're going to do some ink smooshing. And I have to be honest, this was kind of an accident when I did this, because normally I would ink smush first and then I would do my stamping on top of it. But I had stamped my background and then did the ink, and then I was like, oh, I wanted to do the ink smooshing, and I'm just going to share with you here how that will still work. So and it won't completely ruin this background here. So get that ink, you just smush it onto the craft mat there, spritz it with some water till it kind of beads up. I like working on this non-stick craft mat that is for the glass media mats from Timholtz. I just like the way the ink plays and reacts on this, but you could do this on your glass mat or other kind of craft mat if you like. And then we're just going to smush the paper into the ink. And then I'm going to give that a quick little dry. And even though maybe you've lost maybe a slight little bit of the detail from the stamping, I don't feel like it's so much that it's completely ruined all the stamping. So I was kind of pleased to be able to find that I could do that and still like the background. Now that's not to say that if you keep smushing and smushing, you know, the more water you add to this, the more likely it is that you're going to get those images to bleed and not look quite so crisp. You know, so if you do want to do another little dip in here or there, you could certainly do that and, you know, add to the layers. So I'm just going to do a little bit more here maybe. I always like to finger paint some. Sometimes I like spots in certain spaces, and a little bit more up there. And there we go. And I'll clean that up. and then just give that a quick dry. As you can see, the images aren't like super crisp, again, because we use the distress ink and then we ink smushed on top of that. If you would prefer your images to be more detailed and crisp, then I would recommend using some kind of a permanent ink like archival ink or like a detail stamping ink, such as the VersaFine Clair. Those inks, the permanent inks tend to stain the clear stamps, and I personally don't care for that. It's just a personal thing. It doesn't damage the stamps. It doesn't impact their ability to do anything. It doesn't hurt them at all to use those archival permanent inks on them. It's just personal preference for me. For me, I just usually try to use some kind of water reactive ink, such as the Distress inks or the Distress Oxides. The next thing I want to do on this background is just add a little bit of some stenciling, and here I've got the Speckled Egg Distress ink and that filigree stencil, and I'm just using a blending brush to apply that ink through the stencil, and it just gives you a slight bit of color and pattern there. I'm not covering the entire background, as you can see, just kind of doing this little corner here. Then you can lift that up and kind of see what you got there. Now I'm going to move that over and do the same thing here on this opposite corner. Now if you want this to show up and be a little more noticeable, you might want to pick a darker blue. Just wanted something that was subtle with just a bit of color, and then because I had some still open white areas in my background, you know, that's where it can kind of peek through and show. And then the last step here for the background is I'm just going to add a little bit of some stamping to the background with a couple of stamps here. And you know, if you want to do this with a stamping block, you certainly could, but I'm just going to use my stamping platform and just create a little interest here with this. So stamp that image there. And again, I'm just going to use that distress ink. Stamp that a couple times just to build up that ink. And it's, again, this is really subtle. It's not something that's going to be a dramatically noticeable thing, but I feel like just the little detail of it is what is, I don't know, just adds to the card background. And I'm going to stamp this image here. And being a little bit lazy and not taking out my foam padding that's in here, but so it's a little bit bulky, but that'll work. And now I'm just going to do that same thing over here. Let's add a little bit of the stamping. Let's kind of go onto the opposite side a little bit there. There, and then maybe do this one here. All right, and so there you go. That's kind of a look at the little stamping detail that we added to the background. Again, it's just subtle. It's not anything that has to be done, but I just like that. I like creating that interest and kind of texture to the backgrounds by adding the stenciling and those other stamps as well. And now the final step I'm going to do is add some splatters with that Distress Spritz peeled paint, and you just want to make sure you shake this up really well. As you can see, the mica is just settles here on the bottom, so there's a little rattling ball in there. You want to get that moving and going and then keep shaking that until all this gets mixed in. I mean, you do really want to patiently wait and shake until the bottom is kind of clear like that when you flip it upside down and almost all of that colorant is mixed in, and then all that mica is mixed in, so that you've really got it mixed well, because otherwise it will clog if you're going to do any spraying with it, and it also just won't give you that shiny effect that you're expecting if it's not mixed in properly as well. So I'm just going to do some splatters. I'm not going to do spraying, and to do that I'm just going to unscrew the lid, and there'll be a little bit here on the nozzle, or on the tube here of the spray. And then I'm just going to tap my finger and splatter that across the background here. And you can kind of add as much as you want. If you want some bigger drops, you can kind of more forcefully splatter it there. And then from here you can just use your heat tool to dry this, or you can let it dry by itself. And so here it is dry, and as you can see, it just adds a little touch of shimmer and shine to the background. And if you don't have the distressed spritz, you could also use the mica stains to do the splatters with. And if you don't care if it's shiny or not, you could also do splatters with the distress spray stains or the distress oxide sprays. So just some options there. But if you want that shimmery effect, you want to use the spritz or the mica stains. So now what I'm going to do is I've taken some distressed watercolor cardstock and cut it out using that butterfly die. And now I'm going to add some stamping with this background stamp. And if you wanted to stamp it on this side and then move it and stamp it on this side to kind of stamp it the direction it's supposed to be, you can. But I'm doing it this way, then I just stamp once. And it doesn't really matter if it's up and down or this way or that, because it's the script and everything that's on there is really, I'm just looking for the texture and interest that it adds to the die cut. So you can see it still looks really cool. I'm going to stamp that a couple times again, because we're stamping with the distress ink here. You could also use archival ink for this if you like. You could use the Oxide inks. But you can get a pretty good impression with the rubber stamps. As you can kind of see, it still beads up just a teeny bit, but not nearly like it does with the clear photopolymer stamps. So now we're going to you want to make sure you dry this ink really well. So use your heat tool or let it sit to the side and dry. And then from here, I'm just going to place this die cut into the embossing folder, kind of line it up with the pattern that's in there, and then just use a little bit of mint tape to kind of hold it in place a little bit here. And I like to just close it and again make sure everything's lined up. So now I'm going to emboss this and just run it through my die cutting machine here, and I'm placing it at a little bit of an angle onto the cutting plate just to have a little less pressure as it's going through the machine. Get all my plates lined up here and push it in, and then just crank it through. And then here is a look at the embossed design. But we are not finished yet, so I'm going to remove that mint tape just very gently, just so you don't accidentally tear your paper, although I don't find it usually doesn't do that for me unless I use it over and over and over again, and then it sometimes will tear. But just go nice and gentle. And now we're going to add some interest to this because we stamped it and then we embossed it, but you can't really see that embossed design. So now we're going to take an ink pad. Doesn't matter what kind of ink pad. It could be the distress ink, it could be the Oxide inks, or any other ink pads that you might be working with. And you're just going to place it down on top and rub it over the raised area, and then that you'll see that ink will start coating that raised embossed design that we've created there. So I'm not pushing very hard, just kind of lightly rubbing it over the surface. And because this particular embossing folder is just a very one-dimensional design, it's not a 3D embossing folder. There's a lot less areas. There's really only the areas that are depressed and embossed into the paper, and then the raised areas. So you can get a really nice design showing when you rub over it like this. So there is a look. And then if you want that a little bit darker, give this a dry, because the distress inks, when you layer them onto each other when they're wet, they because they're water reactive, they're just going to blend. However, if you dry in between, they will layer and give you the ability to create more interest, and in this case allow you to kind of build up the layers and make it darker. And then again from there, just give that another dry and your embellishment's ready to go. So using this technique on a different die or embossing folder, I would look at it as, you could cut like a circle shape, for example, stamp that design onto it, and then select an embossing folder that has a beautiful pattern in it that you like, and then, but that also has kind of some open areas to it. And then you're going to get that similar kind of effect with being able to see that stamping in those lower areas that are embossed into the paper, and then you rub the ink pad over it and you highlight then the raised areas, and just, I don't know, I think it gives a really cool effect, and it really adds a nice touch as an embellishment onto a card. And then to finish off this card, I trimmed it down to 4 5/8 by 5 5/8. So I trimmed off just 1/8 of an inch from what it was originally, and then added a matte layer with some white cardstock. And then I took another piece of white cardstock, inked the edges of it with the Speckled Egg Distress ink to kind of create my own custom colored cardstock. And then I'll just have all this layered on there. I'll add the butterfly. And then the sentiment is just stamped using Distress Oxide ink in Vintage Photo. And then I will add that to the card and finish it off.
Here's a look at the completed card. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed learning some easy distressing techniques for creating your own custom backgrounds and embellishments with stamps and embossing folders. Until next time, stay crafty, my friend. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can join me on a more regular basis. Hit the like if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to join me on my other social media platforms, you can find the links to those in the description box below. Also, feel free to leave me a comment if you have any questions or if there's something you'd love to share with me and our community. I'll see you in the comments below and in the next video. Until next time, stay crafty, my friend.